focus on the transmission side. I did make the point that the transmission challenges represent, if you like, a structural constraint to the degree to which we are able to bring on board new generation capacity, and I'll expand on that. But more significantly is to share with you the work that we're doing. We're doing immediately and we're projecting to do into the future to ensure that we're able to address the constraint on the transmission side, and by definition we should be able to resolve the issues that are associated with the challenges as a result of capacity that has been exhausted, or capacity that is needed for us to be able to have the kind of mix that is desired and help us in the decarbonization agenda, but also resolving the immediate and current problems that are facing us on the generation side. But as per tradition, we have a template just for me to share with you what has been the kind of progress and or lack of progress that we have registered on the generation side, because I think we shouldn't be lost to the fact that we have an existential problem that is confronting us, and that it's manifested in the extent to which we are unable to meet demand, what we call load shedding. And as indicated before, what we attempt to do in this briefing is to give you what has been the performance of the week that was, and we were able to surface a number of indicators. So I'm sharing with you the period from the 24th of July to the 28th of July. So what has been the experience on the generation side in relation to capacity that is available? So you see that it's averaging about 28,310 megawatts, and of course we had a peak during this week in question on the 25th of July, where we had capacity available to the tune of 29,376. And of course, this available capacity is really a sum of a number of elements. So the first one has to do with our planned outages. So if you reduce the planned outages, so it means that there's additional megawatts onto the grid, and that gets to be calculated as part of the totality of the capacity that is available. Just to put this into context, when we did our winter outlook, of course, Eskom generated that. I think the expectation was that to be able to meet the demand that is associated with winter at the rate at which we're performing, the energy availability factor, we wanted to keep this at about 2,500 megawatts. And of course, the improvement in the capacity available has made it possible for us to have what we call good maintenance, essentially ramp up planned maintenance. And you can see that it's sitting at, on average, the week that was, we're sitting at 3,660 megawatts. And then, in fact, on Friday, we had the highest of that period. That is the week that was of 4,126. So that represents, if you like, about 1,600 above what we had projected to be our planned outages for the period, for the winter period. So when the planned outages are up, it simply means that we're doing everything possible in an orchestrated fashion to ensure that we're able to maintain the units, and when they return, hopefully they'll be able to be a bit more enduring, resilient, and over time you'll see the aggregation of these efforts will help to improve the capacity available. And then our albatross still remains the unplanned capacity loss factor. Like I said before, this simply means that the units failed on their own. So it's as a result of a multiplicity of factors. But the principal reason, again, coming out of this week is the fact that the boiler tube leaks are a big contributor to the failure rate. And again, put this in the context of the winter outlook. We generated three scenarios. The best case scenarios was that the unplanned capability loss factor will be about 15,000 megawatts, and the worst case scenario was that it will be 18,000 megawatts. Again, you can see we're just shy of 16,000 megawatts. It's an area that is receiving our attention. Like I said, the more we do planned maintenance, the better the prospects of us of undermining the increase in the capacity, the UCLF. And then the partial load losses simply means that the generating unit, of course, they are producing their own load, but they are not at the desired level, if you like, design capacity. And then you can see again, it's at 6,340. Again, we want to improve their efficiency, so they should be able to perform better, give us a significant amount of megawatts. So what this means is that we want to reduce the unplanned capability loss factor, the UCLF. We want to improve the performance of the unit by reducing the partial load losses. When you bring those together, they add to the available capacity, and it should be able to lift it up. So those are the indices that we are tracking. Those are the areas of attention to ensure that we are able to improve. And then, of course, the peak forecast, you can see that we are far away from the peak that we had projected for in terms of our winter outlook. The worst case scenario was making two major assumptions, that the unplanned capability loss factor will be at 18,000 megawatts, plus that a peak demand will be at 34,000 megawatts, and that was going to plunge us into an intensified stages of load shedding. And as a result of these efforts, we have seen that we are keeping it at the maximum of stage 4 load shedding. Like I said before, load shedding is an unwelcome occurrence, but the more we're able to illustrate that there's gradual improvements, and of course an average person measures that the improvements in terms of the number of hours that your lights are on and off, and of course we use this measure of the stages of load shedding. So that's why we're trying to ensure that by all means we don't go beyond stage 4, and again we're looking forward to, I think, the subsequent weeks that we should be able to take it down. Of course, we are going to, there's a cold front, especially in the Gauteng area. I did say before that it accounts for a significant amount of the load, about 25% of the load. So I think it's something that is worrying, and you are expecting that the demand is going to surge, and then if the improvements in relation to available capacity does not match, if you like, those increases on the demand side, then the only corrective measure that we have is what we call load shedding. And I'm hopeful that we should be in a position to address that situation. The issue of outage slips, like I said before, when we had our best performance during June, the month of June really was an exceptional performance, a significant amount of consistency. Of course, we have since experienced significant reversals, but you can see on the numbers that again were on the upside. So when we were at that peak performance of June, the outage slips were sitting at about 1,300, and now as I speak to you, we are sitting at about 2,065. Again, it's an area that will require attention going forward, so that we are in a position to undermine, if you like, this outage slips, because it talks to the planning dispensation, it talks to our inability to make the necessary measures to ensure that when we make the promise that we'll return the units on time, we indeed keep to that promise. As they help me with the technical issues, our sincere apologies. Again, like I said, these are areas that are going to receive our attention going forward. Of course, I'm doing a summary in relation to what has been our performance. Remember that I said that going forward we are going to use the month of May as our baseline. So if you're on the generation side, on the baseline of May, we're sitting at about 27,410 megawatts. That was the baseline of May, and now when I'm speaking to you, like I said, we're at 28,000. Just a second. It's technology, so it's not load shedding.
Sorry.
Okay, and thanks for that assistance. I do apologize for that, because the numbers are important for us to understand, so that we have a full appreciation of what's happening. So like I said, we're using the month of May as a baseline so that we're able to measure the kind of progression that we're making relative to the baseline over an extended period of time. So you can see that the period of July, on the generation side, we had improved by approximately 1,100 megawatts. I did say the last time that just to understand, put this into EAF performance, approximately 1 percentage point increase amounts to about 477 megawatts. So you can see here, if it's 1,100 megawatts of improvement, so you are talking about, on average, approximately about 3 percentage improvements from the baseline to where we are. And for us, is a tick. Of course, we want to exceed this performance by ensuring that we are very aggressive. The kind of improvements are significant going forward. And then on-planned maintenance, again, put this against the context of what was our winter outlook. I did say that in terms of that winter outlook, we wanted to keep planned maintenance at 2,500. The reason that we are able to lift it is because of improvements on your available capacity, and therefore it gives us an opportunity to take out additional units. And of course, you can see we are ramping it up. We are at 3,493 megawatts. Of course, you'll ask the question, but why not exploit this, get out of winter? The point we are making is that it's a short-term pain and long-term gain. I think that's the point that we're making. Of course, all of us are suffering as a result of load shedding. But when we get to the situation when we say we're out of load shedding, it's important that we are able to give you the assurance that we are confident about these units being resilient, being able to carry us into the future. And then you are undermining your outage sleeps, essentially units just tripping on their own without alerting you. And that's the kind of discipline that we are introducing into how we are treating this area of work. And of course, it's led by Mr. Bheki Nxumalo and his competent team of station managers and the men and women who are at the coalface of addressing the generation of giving us a generation capacity. Again, the unplanned capability loss factor, we want to bring it down. Again, put it into context. The best case scenario was that we're going to be 15,000 megawatts or less. Of course, during the baseline, we're at 17,000, averaging that. Now in July, we're averaging about 15,700. Again, in terms of that trend line relative to the base, we are coming down, and for us, it's reassuring. And then on the partial load losses, so now I'm dismembering, granularizing, essentially those components that makes issues of available capacity. You can see the partial load losses, I say, we want to make the units more efficient. Their generation capacity must approximate their installed capacity. And once you get at those levels, you are getting higher levels of efficiency, you are improving your energy availability factor. Again, the partial load losses, when they go down, is an excellent measure of, an indicator rather, of what is the performance of these units. Of course, it's insignificant, like you see there, about 70 or so, 40 or so megawatts, but again, it's still a decline in the right direction. And PM peak is something that is out of our control. It's a function of the weather and the consumer attitude. Of course, we're doing everything possible. That's why we've been we're making interventions on the demand side. We will be sharing with you, I think, in the next iteration of this, the work that we are doing on the demand side, so that there's an appreciation that there's a concerted effort. Ourselves, of course, Eskom has been very active on mainstream media, encouraging users to ensure that we reduce demand. Of course, we are going to use innovations and technology to help us to connect better with communities and households so that we are able to manage consumption. I made a point around outage sleeps. This is one area that we are seeing significant movement. It almost halved from where we are, 3,476, we are at 1,843. So this talks to better planning, and I had the privilege of joining the generation team. They had their strategic a workshop just to try further understand the nature of the problem and what are the kind of actions that needs to be taken on the generation side, on the short-term basis and long-term basis, and this area of outage sleep, which is a function of planning and management, has received extended attention in that conversation by the various station managers assembled in one team, of course led by Mr. Bekin Ngumalo. And you'll see it's one area where I'm confident we'll continue to see significant strides going into the future. So I thought that we must map the issues around generation. Now let me just gallop on the transmission side. Like I said, there's a multiplicity of areas that requires attention. So there's multiple fronts. So there's the issues of generation, and then of course there are issues of transmission. And the point I've been making consistently is that we can't kick the can down the road and think that will resolve transmission sometime in the future once we have sufficient generation. It's important that we are able to address this in parallel. So these are the twin challenges that are facing us at the moment. Of course, the issues of distribution down the value chain that must receive attention at the right point, of course, we'll share with you. But these are the twin challenges that should be addressed for us to be able to resolve the load shedding problem. The generation side, what I've been sharing with you is principally on installed capacity. The transmission side is going to enable new generation capacity, especially the renewables, and is going to help us to have a healthy mix of generation sources in the country. So this is really the assets, the generation assets, as they put it. So you've got 7 grids over 9 provinces. You know, I like using the metaphor of the cars and the roads, because I think it's important that we democratize this conversation. We don't just talk alone as the so-called enlightened, the engineering experts. I think we must bring it closer to home so that there's an appreciation. So if you like, these are the major freeways that are conveying the electrons. The electrons in the metaphor of the cars, of the roads, is the roads, the national roads that are connecting one major province to another, one major city to the another. N1, the Limpopo, the N3, Gauteng taking you to Durban, the N4, Gauteng taking you to the northwest. So these are the major roads. These are high-speed roads. You attain speeds of 120 kilometers plus. They are wide. They've got multiple lanes. These are the freeways that are conveying, if you like, our cars. And in this instance, these are the freeways that are conveying our electrons. So we have the total of 33,217 kilometers of high voltage and extra high voltage. So if you like, the network of the grid is made up of 33,270. It's important, this figure, because I'm going to show you later the kind of extension of this network to enable us to take opportunities around the issues of renewable. And then you have 160,194 MVA of installed transformer capacity. Again, let me use the metaphor of the road. So transformers really, they get to move electricity from high voltage, which is the transmission line, these freeways to low voltage. So they transform that into from high to low voltage, so that you are able to get the electricity there at home. So, I mean, if you were to use the metaphor of the car, I did say that you have these freeways, the cars are moving at high speeds, and that's where your transmission line. So that's where, and then the transformers, if you like, is your off-ramps. As you off-ramp on the road, on the N1, you off-ramp, and then there's a traffic, a speed attenuation measure. The one that reduces the speed, you are going to go into a traffic light or you are going to reach a stop sign. And that's why you are going to slow down your car. And then as you move into your local roads, you get what we call the speed humps. So think of transformers as you are when you off-ramp, you are off-ramps, you think of them as a stop sign, you think of them as traffic lights, and then you think of them as speed humps. They are slowing down the cars, and in this instance, they are slowing down the speed of the cars, these electrons, so that there's no huge amount of electricity that comes into a house, because now the house will not be able to accommodate that. So that's what we are talking. So these are the transmission assets And then we've got about 572 transformers and substations. And then we also have about 3,197 employees. This is important, the component of employees. They are a significant asset in helping us to expand the grid, because it talks about our capacity and the technical capacity that is sitting with, technical skills rather, that is sitting with Mr. Sokomoto Skieparis, who's leading the area of transmission in Eskom. So when we are going to lift this, I'm sure there's going to be a requirement for us to have additional technical capacity to help us to roll additional transmission line. And then there's a conversation. So what is it that you are trying to resolve? So what we are trying to resolve is that if you look at the map, I did show you the map of the transmission line, and then you ask the question, who are these people who want to connect onto this transmission line? So it's typically the new generation capacity, and this generation capacity is from the renewable energy sources, wind and the solar PV. It's concentrated in the areas of the Western Cape and the Northern Cape for obvious reasons. What are those obvious reasons? The Western Cape, the coastline, and the Eastern Cape, they've got some of the best wind speeds. The highest quality of irradiation level in the country is located in the Northern Cape. And therefore, project sponsors, in order to derive optimum efficiency out of these technologies, they choose those locations. But those locations are not, there's no symmetry between those locations and where grid capacity is available. And that's why, as I speak to you, stand before you now, is that we have sufficient grid capacity essentially in 3 provinces. If you were to look at the number of applications to connect to the grid, of course we do accept that not all of these applications will come to fruition, will get to financial close, but it's an excellent indicator of the appetite of the market, of where they see the efficient the optimal location of these renewable energy sources. You can see KZN, huge capacity that is available because of the number of applications. They are lesser than the capacity that is available. And that's why the opportunity around gas, of course, you can have it at Kucha in the Eastern Cape, you can have it at Saldanha in the Western Cape, but the one in Richards Bay is the one that gives you the best opportunity, and best in this instance is measured relative to the capacity that is available to connect to the grid, because it will take us an inordinate amount of resources, both people and money, for us to be able to create additional grid capacity. And that's why you see that in all of the provinces, except these 3 that I've mentioned, KZN, Mpumalanga and Gauteng, that's where we have capacity. And then you can see in Gauteng there's no application for grid access. And of course it takes to what the market thinks about renewable energy sources located in the province called Gauteng. And I guess it's also in part as a result of the fact that you don't have a significant amount of real estate. So Gauteng accounts for 1.2% of the total land mass of the country, and therefore to have this big development of renewables, you are unlikely going to find sufficient space. Of course, it could be in private hands, and that's what explains the situation. But the biggest message here, we don't have transmission capacity in the Western Cape and the Northern Cape. But the point is not to lament the situation. What are we doing about it? We'll return to what is it that we are doing about it. The first thing I had indicated was that if you were to look at the trend line, you need to improve, if you like, the lines by about 14,000 kilometers of new line over a period of time. So if you look at the past 10 years, what has happened is that Eskom has increased the lines by about 4,347 kilometers. So if you want to go to the next 10 years, like I said, you need 14,218 kilometers, and this amounts to about 218 kilometers of new line. And you can see that at its peak, we should be connecting about 2,700 kilometers of new line per annum. And when I was speaking to the experts here, Sokomoto and his team, they were indicating that the historic high that we have registered is about 800 kilometers. And that talks to the capacity of the industry to help us to roll to roll this infrastructure. So there's a lot of work that we must do. Outside the money being available, and I'll share with you what are the proportions and the scale of funding that is required. I did say that is significant. Outside that, you need to build industry capacity. Otherwise, we are going to be importing and importing. And I think the sense we have here is that you need, on the back of this crisis, on the back of see-through and certainty going to the future, you need to build sufficient industrial capacity. And in this way, you are resolving the unemployment question, but also you see the opportunities on the continent within the context of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, so that South Africa continues to be an industrial hub of the continent. Of course, we are losing that badge, that claim over a period of time. I think we have hemorrhaged or lost the industrial capacity, principally because you have an energy problem in the country. No one investing in a country where there's energy famine, there's no certainty of supply and also the quality of supply. And that's why I'm saying that what threatens the investability of this country in the immediate is the energy situation. And that's why the South African Reserve Bank makes the point when they release their results or decisions of the Monetary Policy Committee. They make the point that load shedding is a structural constraint, and that's why we need to provide sufficient attention to that. And then in terms of the MVA bill, the transformers, again, you need a 600% increase in transmission infrastructure in the next 10 years. So what they've done over the past 10 years, what have we achieved? 19,060 MVA. The projection is that going into the future, we need a whopping 122,669 of MVA capacity for us to be able to meet the kind of ambition that we have. And that amounts to about a 600% increase in transmission infrastructure over the next 10 years. So that's significant. And of course, it presents its own opportunities. And I really want to commend Mr. Skeepers and his team. I think they've done a significant amount of computation, analysis, and modeling to arrive at these numbers and to say to us that this is what the future holds. But as I speak to you, they are what we call low-hanging fruits. So whilst I've mapped the MVA requirements, I've mapped the requirements in relation to the expansion of the new lines, there's something that we can do now as we work our way up in addressing those two areas, so that we're having the additional megawatts available on the grid now, because it's a crisis that is confronting us now. So what we are doing is to upgrade the existing transformers. So the transformers, they're installed, so we're increasing their capacity. And we're talking about a total of 25 projects that can unleash about 13 gigawatts of electricity into the grid. And you can see that in terms of these projects that are underway, we of course, planned to start 2026. This is connected by 2026, but the work start now. So this is the work that we were doing to ensure that there's additional capacity. And you can see, for obvious reasons, that the Western Cape trumps all provinces in relation to what is this new megawatts that can be enabled. It can be enabled because the concentration of this renewable energy capacity resides in the Northern Cape and the Western Cape. And if we are to improve the transformers that are there already, the footprint of the transformers in the Western Cape, we can get just the Western Cape alone as a share of the 13 gigawatts, it's about 3 gigawatts, 2,950 megawatts. It's possible coming out of the Western Cape. So I'm talking about the work that we are doing now, so that we don't just lament, just paint a picture and not address the kind of actions that we are taking to address the situation. And then we need to ensure that we are able to expedite the project. So we are able to bring them quicker online, so that we were able to expand the grid capacity. Again, in terms of this, we have identified about 22 projects, and these projects can give us about 24 gigawatts, of course, by 2033. The work starts now. 2026 generation connection capacity enabled each year. You can see we are ramping it up starting from 2026. But the important part is that the work starts now to ensure that this is enabled in this instance is connected, and the economy has got the benefit of this additional megawatts. It's important that as we resolve the current and now the crisis, we are able to build that buffer. The point I've been saying consistently over a period of time, it is important that we are able to bring transmission into the conversation, and we are able to share with the country the work that we are doing. Again, you can see that there's a concentration of these projects located in the Western Cape and the Northern Cape and the Eastern Cape for obvious reasons. Like I said, the coastal areas, Western Cape, Eastern Cape, they've got the highest wind speed, and that's why we have a density of wind projects in those areas. We've got the Northern Cape, renewable hub of the country. Of course, you can see that we can get from the Northern Cape as a result of these expedited projects, these 22 projects. From the Northern Cape, we can get about 5,845 megawatts. The Western Cape, we can get an additional close to 9 gigawatts, 8,954 megawatts. And then in the Eastern Cape, about close to 6 gigawatts, 5,875 megawatts. And this is an illustration of the deliberateness of this effort, so that we are responding to what the market says, because there's efficiencies and optimal locations that they've identified, and it's important that we work with the market to support this reconfiguration of the grid, because that's what it means. It's just an alteration of the grid configuration so that it gets to reflect the renewable energy sources, and it makes it possible for us to realize that ambition of an energy mix that is biased towards renewables and help us to meet our nationally determined contribution and also the net zero part. So it's important that those commitments, they get to be supported by an infrastructure layout that is biased towards these renewables. And then there's grid capacity in construction as I speak to you. Like I said, we don't lament, say that this is a profile of the picture going into the future, but there are things that I have identified as the low-hanging fruit. So if in this instance we say that there are several projects that are in execution as I speak to you now, and they can give us a generation connection immediately, in addition to the 2 slides that I've shared with you. The capacity going into the future, the 22 projects that I was referring to, and the 25 projects that can give us the 13 gigawatts. There's something that we are doing now. And then those are about the 3 projects, so which will deliver, in terms of our computation, about 2,300 megawatts, is what we call the Iris Uppington 400 kV line. We have the Juno Gromis 400 kV line, and we also have the Poseidon Pembroke 400 kV line, and also we're doing transformers at Noma, Kronos, and Uppington to support all of this. So these are projects that are now in construction as I speak to you, and they can unleash 2,300 megawatts of energy. That's 2 stages of load shedding, to use our common parlance that has been born out of the load shedding crisis. So I think it's important that the conversations are nuanced. We're able to share with you what is it that we are doing now. And as I conclude, then there's a conundrum of financing. So I raised the issues around where we see this grid profile, the transmission profile, both the lines and also the transformers. We shared with you what it can unleash into the South African economy going into 2033. I shared with you the projects that are now in construction. I shared with you the ones that we are expediting to ensure that we get additional grid capacity. All of these things requires money. So if you look at what has been the trend over the period as a result of the constraints of the Eskom balance sheet before there was this fiscal support, you will see that every time the Eskom team from transmission led by Mr. Skieparas will say that from where we are, we need this amount of resources. And then you find that because of those constraints, they get something lower than that. And there's a delta that has been accumulating over time. And that represents the fact that we are behind where we want to be from a planning point of view as a result of the limited financing. And you see that going into the future for the financial year 2025, they'll need about close to about 100 billion rands, and then gets to be ramped up by 2029, will need close to about 170 billion rand. So that's the scale of proportion that is required. And one of the conversations we are having, of course, at the level of NICOM and also working with work stream number 10, is how do you finance this? Clearly, the ESCOM balance sheet will not be sufficient. Of course, the fiscal matrix has deteriorated, so you need alternative sources of financing. And that's the work that we are addressing. And of course, once we have finalized those internal conversations, we'll share with yourselves and of course the market on how you resolve this. So funding is a major issue. The issue around the industry capacities is a major issue, but that I think can be resolved by the market. As long as the market has see-through, the market has certainty, the market knows that we are believable when we say we'll deliver on this program, the market knows where these sources of financing will come from, the market will build the necessary capacity, and of course we want that capacity to be located internally. So for people to make upfront capital costs to invest in capacity expansion or new capacity, the kind of investments that are required are significant, and therefore you need certainty about the future to justify the size of investment that we'll be making in the South African economy. So really that brings us to an end. So we thought that we should focus on transmission so that there's an appreciation that as we resolve the now, we are doing everything possible on the transmission side to exploit the opportunities that can be derived from the low-hanging fruit, what is possible in the medium term, what's possible in the long term, going to 2033, the amount of gigawatts that can be unleashed so that we are able to give certainty to the market, project sponsors can start execution, and then we are able to resolve the energy crisis. Thanks, DG.
Thank you very much, Minister. Let me, before we take questions, just introduce the colleagues that are supporting the Minister today. On our far left, we have Sol Maska from Presidency. Next to him, we have Prince Moyo. And next to him, we have Kgosientsho Skippers. They are both from ESCOM, from the transmission team. Then online, we are joined by Thomas Conrad, who's also from ESCOM, but from the generation team. And then next to the Minister, with the colleagues in the room, I see Antoinette already has got her hand up. Then from the colleagues in the room, we'll then move to the online colleagues. Over to you, Antoinette.
Good morning, Antoinette Slowes from Rampur. Minister, the energy regulator, NERSA, issued a statement late on Friday afternoon saying it has approved the license for the transmission company. But it did not disclose that only one element was approved. And I understand from people in the industry that was that sent quite a shockwave through the industry, and there's serious concern that it will delay the unbundling of the transmission company and unlocking the finance that you're talking about. Can you please just give us your perspective on that? And then can you just indicate whether the restoration or interim solution at Kgosientsho is on track or whether there's an outage slip? And also if there's an update on good work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antoinette. Any colleagues in the room? Okay, we'll allow Takalani to read the questions from the online colleagues.
Thank you, DG. We have a couple of questions from Elmo, from Independent Media. And his first question is, how many applications have been lodged with the one-stop shop so far? And the second question is, any idea when the DMRE will release the updated IRP? And when will the new ESCOM CEO be appointed? And how many megawatts have come available due to maintenance at energy-intensive industries such as ferroalloys? delivered to Majuba is done by rail currently? And how will the 25% plus load factor of the OCGT impact on the economic life? And when will we see the report on the independent assessment of ESCOM's power stations? And is the IPP office engaging with those bidders that were unable to get financial closure in bid 5? And the last two questions, ADG, are coming from Spelele Tudla from Business Report. And the first question is, what does the licensing of the National Transmission Company by NERSA on Friday mean in the greater scheme of things? And the last question is, how much of the plus or minus 200 billion rand required to expand and strengthen the transmission grid will be coming from ESCOM and from the private sector? Thank you, DG.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tagalani. Minister, we will allow you to lead the colleagues who should come first. Okay. We have Sol first. Okay. We'll have Sol as Masker from the presidency first coming, and then Sekgomosho skippers from ESCOM also coming, then the minister will then come in.
Thank you, Minister and Acting DG, and hello everyone. From the perspective of NECOM, I'll try to answer a few of the questions and then leave others, particularly for the ESCOM team. Antoinette, I think your question was the first about the licensing for the transmission company. And just to put this into perspective, as you know, the National Transmission Company is the first entity to be unbundled from ESCOM and is really critical as part of the reform process in the energy sector. First of all, because having an independent, a meaningfully independent national grid operator will create a level playing field for public and private generators, so it's crucial for the market reform process. But also, as the Minister has just outlined, given the scale of investment in the transmission network that's needed over the next decade, having a transmission company that's able to focus on that rollout is really crucial. So we have always focused on this as really the critical first step. The NTCSA itself was created as a company at the end of 2021. And since then, there's been a process of operationalizing it. And effectively, there are three hurdles that the NTC has to overcome in order to be fully established. The first is to have its licenses approved, and I'll speak about that in a moment. The second is to have a board appointed, an independent board appointed for the transmission company, and that is close to being finalized. And the third is to have all lender consents in place for the subsidiary to be established. And those engagements with lenders are also advanced. On the license applications, the transmission company had applied for 3 licenses to the regulator, one for transmission, one for trading, and one for import-export. And as we understand, as the regulator announced, NERSA has approved the first of those 3, so the transmission license, which would allow the NTCSA to act as the system operator to operate the national grid. They haven't made a decision on the other 2 licenses, so it's just to, I think, clarify, they haven't been rejected or turned down, but a decision on the second and third applications hasn't been made yet. We are very concerned about that because the NTCSA needs all 3 licenses in order to operate and to fulfill its intended functions, including, for example, to be able to be the buyer for legacy IPP contracts, which ESCOM is currently. And that's what the trading license would allow. But as things stand, we don't yet have the record of decision from NERSA. We don't fully understand the reasons or the timeframes in which the decision will be made on the remaining licenses. And so we'll be able to comment fully once we do. What we would say, though, is that given the enormous importance of fully operationalizing the transmission company for South Africa, our hope is that we would be able to resolve this sooner rather than later, and have the remaining 2 licenses in place alongside the other 2 conditions that I mentioned, so that there shouldn't be too much of a delay in establishing the entity. Let me also briefly talk about the one-stop shop. I think there was a question online about how many applications have been launched with the one-stop shop. The OSS, or the one-stop shop, was launched on Thursday by the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, and it builds on the work of a task team that had been established last year following the raising of the licensing threshold, the Embedded Generation Task Team, chaired by the Presidency, and which included all of the necessary departments that are involved in facilitating energy projects. And that task team had identified more than 100 projects that it was actively facilitating. The one-stop shop is taking over those projects and will continue to facilitate them, to take them all the way through to construction. Some are more advanced than others. But what it does is to put in place a dedicated institutional capacity to actively facilitate. So both human resources as well as an online platform for projects to register and to have their applications tracked. And so it will help to really accelerate that process. As new projects come on stream, developers will now be able to approach the one-stop shop directly, provide all of their information on that online platform that was launched on Thursday, instead of going to 12 or 14 different departments to lodge applications one by one and then have to manage and follow up on that process themselves. So at the moment, it is more than 100 projects being facilitated. We expect that number to increase. But most importantly, the experience of a project developer developing a renewable energy project in South Africa should really change now. There should be a single interface, a single point of entry for developers to get more capacity onto the grid. So having addressed those 2 questions, I think the rest I'll leave to the Minister and the ESCOM colleagues. Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks to Sol for covering a number of the questions that relate to the licensing of the National Transmission Company, South Africa. Just to supplement, the approval of the license takes place in 2 stages. There is the Electricity Subcommittee of NESA, of the Board of NESA, and on the 4th of August, they had their first deliberations where they indicated clearly that they are ready to recommend the transmission license, which is what was tabled at the full board this past week and was approved. There's still some work to do on that, but I'm just trying to highlight that it was not a surprise. They had indicated that the other 2 licenses they are considering, and they will make a decision in due course. So that is where they are. I think it's more an administrative issue than an indication of anything else. Secondly, maybe just to touch also on the second question that said, what does the licensing actually mean? I think it takes us back to why are we restructuring, why are we unbundling? And some of the reasons have been highlighted in the ESCOM roadmap from the Department of Public Enterprises. This was published in 2019. So I'll just give a quick summary of some of the key reasons for the unbundling. One of them was around the transparency of the 3 businesses, generation, transmission, and distribution, because as we are currently vertically integrated, it's very difficult sometimes for investors, customers, stakeholders to understand the performance, the issues, and the challenges we may be experiencing. So transparency in terms of performance is one of the reasons. Secondly, it relates to transparency, particularly in terms of costs, because all these businesses actually have different cost structures and cost drivers. And as the Minister has just indicated, there's a big chunk of investment required in the network, and it's important that there be transparency around what is happening there so that customers, investors, and the lenders can have confidence to advance us the significant resources that we require. The other aspects related to agility, that the businesses in the future need to be more agile. Being very big sometimes can be a disadvantage, and as you form more focused businesses, you are able to respond with greater agility to the challenges and to the customer needs. And lastly, and I think this is almost self-evident, is around focus. Because these are diverse businesses actually, although you look at them as one just for electricity, but they are very diverse businesses, different challenges, and it's important that we be able to focus on each part of the value chain and make sure that we can discharge our responsibilities appropriately. So the last one is also around independence, because transmission is a monopoly. So as you have more private generators coming on stream, they need to know that the transmission business actually will treat them equitably to any other player. And the same applies on the distributor side, that ESCOM is a distributor, but there are other distributors, and they all need access to the transmission grid, and they need to know that they will be treated in an equitable manner, in a transparent manner, which under NESA's oversight. So those are some of the factors for why we are doing the unbundling. So the licensing is a first step towards getting there, and as Saul indicated, there's a number of 2 or 3 other dependencies that need to be addressed, setting up the independent board of directors for the subsidiary, and ensuring that we achieve lender consents for the transaction to be concluded. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to my colleagues, both Saul and Kgosientsho. Maybe to Antoinette's point on the timelines related to Kusile and Kubek. On the Kubek one, I did indicate Antoinette the last time that we will engage with the board, and then we'll come back to you. And when I say to you, just the general public, to say this is where we are in relation to Unit 1 and whether it's going to overlap into Unit 2 being taken offline. So that conversation, Antoinette, is still happening. I'm happy to say that on Kusile we remain on track, very confident about the rate and the quality of the work that is being done there. And Mr. Nxumalo is also overseeing that directly, I think, as the head of generation. And also on the sideline of this strategic session, he also gave me an indication on where the teams are. Just a recollection, we expect to bring Unit 1, I think, late November, around the 28th, Unit 3 around mid-December, and Unit 2 about the 24th of December. So there we remain on track, Antoinette. I'm confident about the team that is doing that work, and also one of the most experienced GM, Karabo, is also working at Kusile, just helping the team to ensure that we remain within the timelines that we had set for ourselves, and we are in fact on course to doing that. And then on the IRP, so we're very grateful to ESCOM because they've seconded additional capacity to the team that is working on the IRP, and we're looking forward to coming to the public in the next 2 months or so on the updated version, of course, for a conversation and consultation with the general public. On the issue of the CEO, like I said previously, is a domain of the board. So I will not enter that space. The corporate governance at the board at the right time, and the shareholder representative, the Minister of Public Enterprise, will provide that update. So that's something that outside my domain of work. That's Helmut's question. The other one from Helmut is on the 25% on-load of the OCGT. You're absolutely correct. I don't think that they are designed for that. TV on-load for that period of time, and that can undermine, if you like, as you put it, their economic life. Of course, we are faced with a crisis. We are continue to super exploit those assets, and I did say and admit previously that there's a downside, and that downside is really to reduce their economic life, because, like I said, they are not designed to do that. They are designed to be called when there's a demand does not, or generation can't meet demand. But of course, our situation now is that almost on a permanent basis, generation is not sufficient to meet demand, and we are exploiting these assets. Of course, there's a downside. So I fully agree with you on the implications and the risk associated with that. And then on the issue of the independent report, I'm assuming, Helmut, that you are referring to the independent report that was commissioned by National Treasury. The deadline was around the end of July for them to bring that report. Minister Godongwana, coincidentally, we were talking last week Thursday in another meeting, and he did indicate to me that once it's done, it will also be brought to our attention so that we get to familiarize ourselves with the content of the report, interrogate, and see what can be taken out of those reports that can help us to respond appropriately in relation to the life of these coal assets, the power stations there. And then on the issues around financial closure of the last window, the IPP is engaging, office is engaging with the project developers. So once we get that an indication on how far they in that conversation, Helmut, I'm sure I'll be more than happy to bring it to the attention of the general public, of course, using this platform and many other platforms. And then on the Majuba, yes, I think the one line is active as I speak to you, and then the second line really is about engaging ESCOM. There are issues around locomotives and the like. I'm sure once that is resolved, we should be in a position to share with you publicly. And I guess the one on from Siphelele have been responded to, by both a combination of Sol and Sekgomojo. Thanks. Oh, yes, the funding, sorry, I have it, yeah. The funding, as Siphelele, you are right. So I did make the point in my elaborate presentation to say that we are engaging with the team. Of course, we are one team. We are team in South Africa to see how best we can finance this amount of rollout that is required for us to support the issues around transmission. I mean, we are sitting with a number of permutations, and some of them have got policy implications. And to the degree that they require a consideration by the policymakers, of course, I'll take that to Cabinet, of course, working with the Minister Godani in this instance, because he's primarily responsible for that company. So there are multiple combinations. But what we know, I mean, even before we say what the answer is that the scale and the speed that is required for us to be able to invest in that is highly unlikely going to be met by the balance sheet constraints of both ESCOM and also the national fiscus. The second thing that we know is that there's a big appetite, significant amount of liquidity in the private sector that stand ready to finance that. The other thing that we know is that the grid in many parts of the world remains a monopoly, public owned. It's not something that as an asset that is relinquished to private sector ownership. So having, and then there are issues around what are the cost implications to the end consumer if you had to choose one option over the other. So the configuration of those options, you can see the complexity and the matrix is such that it requires that that conversation. Is a very complex algorithm, but we are very confident that we should be in a position to find an answer. What the transmission team has done exceptionally well is to compute what is the kind of investment in rent value terms that is required for us to be able to finance. So we know what the number is, so we know what is it that we should be searching for us to resolve that. So Siphelele, the long and short is, no, I don't have an absolute answer because it's something that is still a subject of discussion internally.
Thank you very much, Minister. So we're going to be taking the last rounds of hands from the room, and then we'll also move to the online colleagues. Antoinette?
Thank you. Minister, you've been widely criticized, in the past week about comments you made regarding Komati. and especially saying that Komati gave us 1,000 megawatt, while it hasn't done that for years. Would you like to respond to that?
Good morning, Odi here from the SABC. Just wanted to find out on the threats that maybe have been identified by the ministry over time in terms of ensuring that this energy action plan becomes a reality. I know over time that issues of corruption and what has been happening at ESCOM, issues of sabotage, and where we saw that the deployment even of the army going to the ground at some of these facilities, something that has been a cause for concern. Maybe would you like to just give us an update in terms of what has been done or progress where issues around corruption and threats to the implementation of this energy action plan are concerned?
Thank you very much. Dylan, can you take us through the online questions?
Thank you, DG. We have two last questions from Terence Kramer, who is representing Engineering News. The first question is, what models are being investigated beyond ESCOM's shift to EPC to accelerate transmission investment, and what are the current industrial capacity gaps that are worrying ESCOM? The last question is, what will the impact be should the court decide tomorrow to interdict ESCOM's grid queuing rules? Thank you, DG.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for those questions. Okay. We will have Minister responding to all the questions and also doing the concluding remarks.
Oh, Antoinette, the one on commodity. So now I'm giving you the update on the EAP. And that one we can have a conversation outside around the issues of ideological orientation, issues of choices we are making. So I don't want to soil this update with those. And I'm happy to take that outside. So I'm going to leave it there, Antoinette. I was surprised that that question is not coming. I'm happy it's coming from you. I know. It's friendly fire there. That's fine. Okay, but for real, I think I don't want to soil this. I can do that outside. And then Katleho, yes, I think the 2 briefings ago we gave an update in relation to the security issues, the issues of crime, corruption. I did say that there's work stream number 6 that is working on that. I gave the commitment that we'll come back again to give you a much more elaborate detail. We really prefer that the experts who are working on that area of work should be present when we give that kind of detail. And of course, ESCOM does from time to time also make public statements in relation to the arrests, people appearing in court, and I'm sure you'd have seen a number of those being reported in the mainstream media. We'll leave that to ESCOM because I think we don't want to blur the lines. I think there's a board there that has got fiduciary duties. There's a CEO, there's a management team. To the extent that those things belong to their domain, we really don't want to interfere with that. The last thing you want is to usurp the powers that don't belong to you. And we've got an exceptional working relationship with the team. And then on the models, like I said, the issues around transmission is an internal conversation. We are still having that discussion. Even amongst ourselves, we are not necessarily agreeable on where we are, which is a healthy conversation. And I suppose that the outcome of that will be something that is really tested in that it would have taken into account the various permutations on what is possible, but overall, I'm sure that the proposal will be taken forward to the policymakers is the one that takes into account the scale of the crisis, the speed, the levels of agility that Mr. Skeppers referred to earlier on, and also the fact that you need additional financing to do that. So it's something that it remains under discussion. On the issues of the grid queuing rules, the objections being taken to court, yes, I think, to deny that is going to undermine our efforts it will be a misrepresentation of facts. I mean, ideally, we would have wanted a situation where we are smooth sailing. Of course, we do accept that people have a right where they are aggrieved to go through the courts. I did say even the last meeting that we'll make every effort ourselves outside the issues of the court. This thing of saying that it's sub judice, we leave that, but I think there's a conversation to be had also with those that are aggrieved to the extent that they want to sit around the table without interfering with the court process. We are trying to do that, to secure that meeting, have a conversation as a ministry without taking away their rights. And remember that what undergirds the issues of the grid queuing rules was that first ready, first serve. Because I think our observation over time is that the first come, first serve principle did not help, because there are projects that have been hogging, if you like, grid access for some time. They are not getting to financial close, and this undermined our overall ability to ensure that we are able to bring renewables on board, new generation capacity on board. So we'll sit with the team, with the colleagues that are aggrieved, and see how best we can find a much more cordial solution that responds to their grievances, but also does not undermine what the revision of the grid queuing rules were trying to do, essentially try to accelerate the new grid capacity. Let me just take the opportunity to thank everyone that has made time to join us this morning. We will be, of course, working on that communication strategy in relation to how we work with community stakeholders, business, industry, to ensure that we address the issues around the demand side. We don't see it as a short-term measure. We really think that the philosophy that underpins that is that there has to be behavioral change going into the future. So we're looking forward to launching that and making sure that we are able to address the issues on the demand side. Remember that we started by sharing with you the generation side. Performance is a permanent feature, is a template we have established, and then from time to time we'll add the work of the various work streams, so that you get to know in the country that we are focused not just on resolving the immediate crisis, but we are also looking far into the future. But thank you very much for coming through, and wish you a blessed Sunday. Thanks.